Have you ever said the wrong response at Mass and immediately felt like everyone knew you'd been away? I've done that more times than I'd like to admit. I remember freezing for a second and feeling like everyone knew what they were doing except me. There were even times when I stayed seated during communion because the thought of walking up in front of everyone felt too overwhelming. If you felt that way too, I want you to know something. You are not the only person who feels that way. And by the end of this video, I hope you'll feel a little less alone at Mass. Not because you suddenly know every response perfectly, but because feeling out of place doesn't mean you don't belong there. I think one of the hardest things about returning to Mass after years away is the feeling of not quite being in step with everyone around you. Some of it feels familiar, but there's still this gap between where you are and where everyone else seems to be. You have a sense of what's coming, but then there's these small moments where you stumble. You say the wrong response, you forget when to kneel. You realize mid-sentence that the words you learned as a child aren't quite the same anymore. And those small moments can carry way more weight than they should. Because when you're already feeling uncertain about being there, stumbling over a response doesn't just feel like a mistake. It feels like evidence. Evidence that everyone around you is more at home there than you are. Evidence that you've been away longer than you realized, and that maybe people will know. And that's where the deeper fear starts. Because I don't think the fear is really about saying the wrong thing. Sometimes the deeper fear is, what if people can tell? What if they can tell I haven't been here in years? What if they look at me and think I don't belong here? And that fear can make Mass feel strangely exhausting. Because instead of praying, you're inside your own head, monitoring your every move, quietly hoping nobody noticed. Sometimes Mass can feel less like prayer and more like trying not to stand out. For me, communion could be one of those moments. I want to be careful about how I say this. I don't mean I always avoided communion or that my discomfort was about whether I should receive or not. There were times when the issue was much simpler and much more human than that. I felt anxious. I felt overwhelmed. And the thought of stepping out of the pew and walking forward in front of everyone felt like too much. The pew felt safe. Staying seated felt less exposed. If you've experienced that kind of self-consciousness, you know exactly what I mean. You're not only thinking about receiving communion, you're thinking about how to walk up, whether people are watching, whether you'll somehow make it obvious that you're unsure. That same feeling can show up in smaller ways too. Feeling awkward during the sign of peace, during a response when you forget the words. And part of why this can feel so vulnerable is that Mass is sacred. So you're not only worried about looking awkward, you're also worried about being unintentionally disrespectful in a place that matters. And when you're returning after years away, that can touch something very deep. Maybe you feel like you're coming back with baggage. Maybe you wonder whether you're allowed to come as you are. So when you feel out of step at Mass, it can feel like that fear is being confirmed. I definitely felt that way for a while. But gradually and quietly, something changed. Not all at once, and not because I suddenly became perfectly confident. It was so much more ordinary than that. I remember sitting at Mass one day and glancing around. Part of me expected to feel watched. But then I actually noticed what was happening around me. The woman a few rows ahead was looking up at the priest. The couple directly in front of me was managing their kids. The man beside me had his eyes focused on his missal. Nobody was evaluating me. Everyone was in their own world, praying, distracted, lost in their own thoughts. And I realized that the feeling of being watched was much stronger inside me than it was in reality. It turns out being unfamiliar is not the same thing as being unwelcome. Not knowing every response does not mean you don't belong. Needing to learn the rhythm does not make you less sincere. And there's something humbling about finding your way back to a place you used to know. In some ways, Mass still felt familiar, like returning to something I'd once known. But there were still moments where I felt out of step. What I didn't anticipate was how much that would change, just through continuing to show up. Slowly, things started falling into place. The moments of being out of step became less frequent. Not because I never felt uncomfortable, but because the discomfort stopped feeling like a statement about whether I should be there. And once I stopped focusing so much on how I looked to other people, I could finally start paying attention to why I'd come in the first place. There's an image I keep coming back to, the quiet of an empty church, the tabernacle, the silence, the sense that God is there whether you feel ready or not. Because you're not coming to Mass to impress the people around you. You're coming back because something in you is being drawn back toward God. And if that's true, then feeling out of step sometimes does not disqualify you. You can come exactly as you are. If confession is another part of returning to church that feels intimidating right now, I made a video about that experience too. You can watch that one next. Thanks for being here, and God bless.